we were willing to put our bodies on the line through public demonstrations, occupation, whatever methods, to really make the administration take us seriously around the issues we were experiencing and the solutions that we were suggesting to eradicate those issues. Before I continue, I really have to thank the Freedom Budget Collective at Dartmouth because it's uncomfortable to be up here because I'm not the one who created this document by myself. I'm not the one who created the student movement that we had on campus this year by myself. We had a lot of women of color who were on the vanguard. We had a lot of members of the queer community at our campus who were on the front lines. We had undocumented students organized in a way I've never seen in my past 4 years. And they all came together and really create a document and pressure on administration to really bring space and attention to our issues. So I really want to give a shout out to the Freedom Budget Collective back at Dartmouth. So we went through a series of protests starting on MLK Day, which kind of shocked our school because it was a lot of students of color protesting MLK Day. But the statement that we were trying to send to them is that this MLK that they present every day, that's what we call the hand-holding paradigm, where it's an image of an MLK that's only about little black boys and little white girls holding hands, was not the MLK or not the civil rights movement or not the justice that we had in mind. So we disrupted that day to try to bring a different message. And moving on from that day, we created a freedom budget, which the administration did not respond to adequately. So we responded by taking over the president's office. And we seized the president's office for about a little bit over 48 hours. And they assigned an agreement, and we went through a series of meetings where a lot of the meetings were not that productive, but some of the meetings around undocumented students, around gender neutral spaces, and a few other issues that we brought to the table really were addressed. But this is very much just the beginning, and a lot of this year is around creating a base for the movement, creating a collective of people across many issues and communities that could trust each other, be in solidarity with each other, and protest each other to the end goal, which is really sending a message to our college campus that we are here, we are staying here, and we are changing here, and most importantly, fuck white supremacy.
Well, on that note, we'll turn to history for a few minutes. Oops. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Before I begin, I want to thank Barbara Ransby and the whole team at SJI for putting together this very fabulous conference, which I'm really honored to be a part of. I was asked to talk about Black student activism historically, especially in reference to the late 1960s and 1970s, when tens of thousands of African American students on campuses across the nation went on strike, occupied buildings, and conducted sit-ins. In many respects, this phase of the Black student movement, of the student movement that began in the early 1960s, but it grew and it spread across the country. Many of the student activists of the late 1960s and early 1970s were veterans of the Southern Civil Rights Movement and deeply affected by Freedom Summer. The educational justice movement of that summer, most notably the Freedom Schools, were one of the streams that later forged the demand for collegiate Black studies. But beyond affirmative action, open admissions, and Black or ethnic studies, student activists of the late 1960s articulated radical new visions of higher education. I thought I would use my 5 minutes this morning to highlight some of the lessons from that era of radical campus organizing. First, in contrast to those who might dismiss student activism as a naive stage of life that will come to an end with the onset of adult responsibilities, history teaches us the opposite. Campus activism is actually vital to building and sustaining a democratic society. It's even more important to emphasize this point today, as democracy in the United States appears to be unraveling at lightning speed. College is not just a training for a career, it's also training for engaged citizenship. If young people don't learn how to become comfortable as dissidents and social critics, and comfortable as utopian thinkers, who will? As we heard on the opening plenary, whoops, is this on? Is this on still? Okay. As we heard on the opening plenary of the SNCC veterans, Campus activism can be decisive in forging life paths. The student leaders from the late 1960s went on as well, many of them, to become lifelong social justice advocates in a variety of occupations and terrains of struggle. Some became civil rights or other public interest attorneys, some became community organizers, some built Black studies, some became leaders of the anti-apartheid struggle. But all of these activists credit their student years as central to their political formations and life paths. If we are to resist the deadening effects of neoliberalism in our own political culture, empowering youth and students toward greater critical consciousness and capacity will be paramount. A second key lesson from this history is that student activists often have the audacity to reimagine the status quo. Young activists haven't yet been inundated with the pressure to conform or acclimate to institutional pressures. They're in a position to be bold and ambitious, to imagine a world that ought to be, and to resist the pressure to tone down demands. In the late 1960s, students had been influenced by the long Black freedom struggle, and they took the idea of civil rights and expanded it, arguing that access to higher education should be a right of citizenship, not a privilege. They used this redefinition of rights to make major claims on governments and institutions, winning important changes in hiring, financial aid, curricula, and admissions policies. The recently deceased scholar activist Vincent Harding was pivotal in urging the students to go beyond the conventional and press the boundaries of change. In New York City, for example, students demanded that the elite city college system guarantee admission to any high school graduate. In San Francisco, students didn't just ask for a Black Studies department, but for a college of third world studies. Unfortunately, many of these victories have since been disavowed or repealed, but many of them survived and have fostered and nurtured succeeding generations of student activists. A third lesson from this history is that building principled alliances and forging relationships with communities off campus can strengthen campus movements and help bring more lasting change. Students from the late 1960s, in urban campuses in particular, were successful in building relationships with community activists. They had relationships with the Black Panther Party, local clergy, elected officials, artists, and parents. When they faced police assaults, arrests, and biased media coverage, the community had their backs. Moreover, when students insisted that public colleges and universities, in fact, belonged to the community, having community members on their side made a huge difference. And many of you perhaps on the way to the Alhambra restaurant last night passed by Malcolm X College, and that was precisely a fruit of that community-based struggle. But students also benefited, that relationship was reciprocal, and students benefited from being part of a large mass movement. We don't often think of the urban rebellions of the late 1960s as helping to produce Black studies and open admissions. But administrators of colleges, particularly colleges near cities, were very much afraid that that violence and unrest was going to spread to campuses, and it induced them to make greater concessions. Finally, all movements and activists make mistakes. But if we're lucky, these mistakes can become catalysts for political learning and more effective organizing. Student activists from this era emphasized this point repeatedly in my discussions with them. Several especially stressed mistakes around gender. To be sure, this period of student organizing preceded the rise of Black feminism, but the political learning that came out of the gender politics of the late 1960s pushed many young people in new directions. Many of the female student activists of this era went on to become pioneers in Black feminist theorizing and organizing. Others learned different lessons. Some felt that class had been insufficiently incorporated in their political work, so their later organizing stressed the centrality of the labor question. But all stressed the benefits of being self-critical, open-minded, and non-dogmatic. In many ways, the successes of the Black student movement of the late 1960s can be measured by the extraordinary attacks on their victories ever since. First, it was open admissions, and then affirmative action. Black studies and ethnic studies has survived, and in some places in the country it's flourishing, but in the vast majority of campuses it's still considered marginal and is vastly underfunded. Today, higher education is not seen as a right, but as a privilege, and students are forced to go into extraordinary debt to attain a college education. In many respects, it's these circumstances and conditions that we're facing today that are giving rise to the activism now that we'll continue to hear about on campuses across the country. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. My name is Imani Brown. I'd like to echo everybody else's sentiments in thanking you all for being here, and also for all the organizers of this conference, which I think everybody can agree has been really fantastic so far. So I think that Columbia Prison Divest, the Columbia Prison Divest campaign, is a pretty good example of the way that shared knowledge and information can really serve as a catalyst and sort of create a domino effect for action all across the nation. Students Against Mass Incarceration, the Columbia University chapter, had been talking about prison divestment for a while. And a college activist from another university actually visited us and wanted to talk about the possibility of prison divest, and having had experience herself in terms of engaging in a prison divest campaign at her own school, was able to give us like sort of advice and tips for how we might start our own. So at the beginning of last semester, one of our members actually contacted the university under the premise of needing research for her urban studies thesis to ask for a list of Columbia's investments. So far, I think it's actually mandated that our university has to release about 10% of its investment information. And so we were able to get a hold of that list, and we found that Columbia was actually about $8 million deep invested into the Corrections Corporation of America, and has about $2.5 million invested in G4S. And those represent the two largest private security firms, both in the world and also the US. And so from that point, we were able to draft a letter to the president that we sent her early February, basically expressing our outrage and disappointment at these findings and demanding that Columbia divest immediately from all those groups. We actually had 3 demands in all. The first was that Columbia put up a permanent negative screen for the CCA, G4S, and the GEO group, which we don't know for sure that Columbia's invested in, but seeing as we only had access to about 10% of the investments anyway, who knows? And we did that so that Columbia can't just divest and then reinvest at a later point. Our second request was that Columbia send a message to about, I think, 36 of its of the companies that it's directly invested in that have multi-million shares in the private prison industry, and ask them publicly to divest. In regards to the permanent negative screen, we're also asking that Columbia make a public statement saying that they have divested from all those groups. And the third one has to do with more transparency. We think it's sort of ridiculous that we as students don't have access to what our university is invested in, since what the university chooses to profit off of deeply affects us and implicates us in whatever effect that has on larger society. So we went into the president's office, we read out the letter, and we asked for a meeting with President Bollinger in the next 2 weeks. We did not get a response directly from him. He forwarded the letter to the staff who's responsible for the student. It's actually called the Committee for Socially Responsible Investing. And that, I think that there are actually a lot of committees like that across the country in different universities that popped up shortly after the South African apartheid divest movement of the 1980s. So the thing about that group is, which we are working with to see how they can help us, but we are also aware that with divestment campaigns in the past, there's been a history of them doing research into these claims that students bring to them, and sometimes the research takes as long as 4 years. So by the time you get in and you get out, they're still investigating. So in addition to that, we've done a lot of outreach to the campus so far, and I think that's what this semester is mainly about, making students aware of what their university is invested in, what they're profiting off of, and sort of in that process, teaching and learning and talking about mass incarceration in a larger sense, because we understand that private prisons aren't the cause of mass incarceration, sort of an exacerbating factor for sure, but the real aim is to sort of start a conversation about not only private prisons, but prisons in general, what they're used for, who's criminalized, and why. And we've been connecting that to a lot of other causes that people on campus have been involved in, such as the gentrification of Harlem, which Columbia's really invested in, and that sort of thing. We had a week of action where we had a money wall where students were able to sort of take fake money from one side of the wall that represented the $8 million Columbia has invested in the CCA, and we asked them, what would you like to see Columbia invest this money in instead? So it's not just about a process of asking for divestment, but sort of envisioning together what we to see. So a lot like what this program says, exploring not just what we're against, but what we're for. So that's a dialogue that's still happening on campus, and we hope to take it further as time goes on. During the summer, we're in conversation about the next steps and that sort of thing, and we're hoping in a general sense to create a culture, or use Columbia as a platform to create a culture where it's no longer acceptable to invest in prisons.
So hello everyone, my name is Sohana Jad, and I'm a student at the University of Michigan, and I was involved in the hashtag #UMDivest movement. I too also want to take a moment to thank Professor Nabbit and Professor Ransby and the entire Social Justice Initiative for planning this amazing conference and inviting me in the space. It's an honor and a privilege to be not only at this conference, but on this panel with all these powerhouses. So I'm a member of SAFE, which is Students Allied for Freedom and Equality, and it's the Palestine Solidarity group on the University of Michigan campus. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give like a brief outline of what BDS is and then go specifically into what UMDivest is. I'd first like to list a few facts about the Palestinian struggle. The establishment of the State of Israel. The mic? Okay. Is this better? Okay. The establishment of Israel as a Jewish state in 1948 produced a decades-long system of ethnic cleansing, expulsion, and occupation of the Palestinian people that exists until today. In 1948, 540,000 Palestinians were exiled from their homes. In 1967, that number reached 1.5 million Palestinians, and today over 11 million Palestinian refugees live in the diaspora. Since 1993, over 15,000 Palestinian homes were bulldozed to make room for Jewish-only Israeli settlements. Segregated bus and road systems, including checkpoints and a separation wall, exist in occupied Palestinian territories in order to limit Palestinian freedom of movement and to ultimately make room for expanding Jewish-only settlements. Over the years, thousands of Palestinians have been held in Israeli detention centers as administrative detainees, and this includes children. And it has caused, in 2012, over 2,000 Palestinian prisoners to go on a hunger strike. Approximately 60,000 refugees from South Sudan and Eritrea fleeing the conflict in the Sudan are seeking asylum in Israel. Only 1% are recognized as asylum seekers by Israel, with others denied work permits and described by the government as infiltrators who threaten the Jewish character of Israel. Hundreds are deported every year, and thousands are arbitrarily incarcerated at open-air detention centers with inhumane conditions in the Negev desert. So the U.S. role in this is that the U.S. has provided so much aid to the State of Israel. In fact, in a span of 10 years, the United States has promised Israel $30 billion in military aid only. And that's more aid than all the other countries in the world combined. So the Palestinians have responded. In 2005, over 170 Palestinian civil society groups called on the international community to join their BDS movement. BDS stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. BDS is a global nonviolent human rights campaign inspired by a similar successful movement against South African apartheid, which contributed to the fall of the apartheid regime in the early 90s. So boycott, divestment, sanctions, the first part is boycott. So this is typically like at a university level or individual level, and it's to boycott companies profiting from the violation of Palestinian rights, as well as Israeli cultural and academic institutions that directly contribute to maintaining, defending, or whitewashing the oppression of Palestinians. Divestment, which I'll get to more deeply in a second, is a campaign for divestment of pension funds and university endowments from companies profiting from the violation of Palestinian rights. And the last part is sanctions, which is at a state level, sanctions against the state of Israel. And the point of BDS is to meet three demands by the Palestinian people. The first one is an end to the military occupation of Palestinian land seized in 1967. The second is to ensure full and equal rights for Palestinian citizens within the state of Israel who are discriminated against by over 50 Israeli laws. And the last part is the recognition of the right of Palestinians, refugees to return to their homes as stipulated in UN Resolution 194. So students in solidarity with the Palestinian call to BDS have launched divestment campaigns all over campuses. Divest is just one of them. So we launched one this year. Palestinian students and their allies went to their central student government with a resolution calling on the university to boycott from four companies that they found that the University of Michigan invests in. And so on March 18th, we approached the student government, and before the authors could even present their resolution, there was a motion made to indefinitely table the resolution, which means that we can't even talk about it, and we're not allowed to bring it up again. So the response of the Divest movement was to have a week-long sit-in inside the CSG chambers. Ended up being a week, but we were going to stay there until they brought it to a democratic vote. And we had letters of support from students all over campus. We had over 33 student organizations signing on, including Michigan Women of Color, the Black Student Union, Coalition for Queer People of Color, and so many other organizations. And so what ended up happening is that we had the lounge, which was the Edward Said Lounge. And I think one of the questions that I was asked was whether to think of like social movements as one big movement or a series of small ones. And I think that it's important to keep both in mind, that it is a big movement and individual. I think both of them are important. I think what we tried to maintain, so we had the Edward Said Lounge within like our own space as Palestinian solidarity activists. We tried to always be aware of the different system of oppressions that exist within the movement. I think sometimes when thinking about it as one huge movement, we ignore some of the oppressions that happen. So we tried our best always within the Edward Said Lounge to address sexism, to address racism, to especially when we had so many different organizations, so many different allies from different groups. It's more of a struggle to combat systems of oppression within your own movement than outside. So that was something. I ran out of time.
So good morning, everyone. So again, my name is Ozi Aduma, and I am a, former member of the Black Student Union as of May something, whenever I graduated. So again, I want to echo the gratitude and the thanks for Dr. Ransby and the rest of the team for planning this wonderful conference, but also it's a big thing in my family to express gratitude when given the opportunity. And so I want to express gratitude to a lot of the people in this room, especially a lot of the Black women in this room whose writings, either in print or on Twitter, on Tumblr, wherever, has made me either go yes and snap in solidarity, but has made me be able to question, critique, redefine, unlearn, unpack what it means to be a Black woman and my own Black womanhood. And so I really want to thank you, because I'm too painfully awkward and shy to come up to you personally to do that. So, in preparing for this panel, I was given the question, what does freedom look like? And I've been wrestling with this idea of what freedom looks like, and I think freedom is the ability to just be. On Tumblr, there's a picture going around of Beyonce in a shirt that says, "Can I live?" with her, and she's kind of with her head tilted, and that's been a very big question in my friend group when we mess around with each other saying, "Can I live?" And what does that mean? Can I be? And so I think about this in terms of ideas of humanity and what does it mean to express your humanity or even see the humanity that lives in you. And so the junior year, a really great professor of mine and mentor, Dr. Nisha Hanif, proposed this idea that oppression and racism is the inability to see the humanity that exists in another person. The inability to, I guess, look at the complexities that exist in another person as well, and then really sit with that complexity. And so in terms of thinking about hashtag being black at the University of Michigan, it's what happens when 4.6% of the population on campus doesn't have the ability to express their humanity, to live in shades of gray, to wrestle with the complexities of what it means to be a human, a black human, on this campus, and they're told to be a representative of something or someone that they don't even know who they're representing, and they don't get to represent themselves in a very full, very lively way. And so in 140 characters or less, you're gonna tell it like it is. You're gonna speak your truth. As complex and as hard and as difficult and as much as you are so wrestling with the fact that you don't know what's gonna happen. And so hashtag BBUM was a time for students like myself, whether it's on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, to say, hey, this is my experience at the University of Michigan. And as much as you don't want to hear it, and much as you say you're listening, as the response that we got from the university, you're going to actually listen, and you're going to actually see what type of culture you're contributing to that makes the 4.6% of students feel unsafe, unwanted, unappreciated, unworthy, make them feel like they don't have a worth or they're not contributing anything to the body at large. And so when you cease to becoming a representation, so it's a time for you to cease to becoming the representation or the token of the school's diversity. And so I guess when reimagining what it means to be a black student at the University of Michigan, it's your time to tell your story and to live in your complexities. And so another question that we received is how can we engage in political quilting or movement building with each other? I think a big thing that happened with us is that there were so many students on our campus who were doing similar types of work, but I think coalition building became very troublesome because it wasn't coming from a genuine or authentic place. We were kind of just sending representatives and say, okay, you be the representative of the Black Student Union, you be the representative of this, and let's see what happens. But what happens when you're just sending representatives, you're not being accountable to one another. You're not actually building community, and coalition building is shit at that point. And so really understanding that when building these connections and when building these coalitions, you must look at historical specificity. When you're saying students of color, do you actually mean students of color, or do you mean black students? Do you mean API students? Who are you talking about in that moment? Do not erase the history that has happened on that campus and what's happening to specific students because you are contributing to an erasure, or you're contributing to people. We like to throw around white supremacy, but we don't want to get to the root of the fact that what it means to be a non-black student of color and not feeling the effects of what it means to be a person of African descent. Number two, coalition building you build coalitions with individuals and not with organizations. And relationships built on love, humanity, and respect get you a lot further. So it was easy for me to link up with Suha because Suha and I spent nights in an apartment eating pizza where she bought buffalo chicken pizza and we spent drinking tea because I know her story at that moment. And I knew the story behind the number. And I love and respect her that much to say we're going to support her, or as a group we are going to support her. And so making sure that you are very purposeful and you're very accountable to the community that you're trying to build. Because if you're trying to get along, if you're trying to get further in your mission, it's not going to happen if you're being disingenuous. So thank you.
Hello? Can y'all hear me? Okay. Hi, how are y'all doing? Y'all look like you're falling asleep, half y'all in this room. Hi, hello. Nice to see you all this morning. Okay, my name is Jessica. I'm the co-chair of Black Youth Project 100. So, of course, we were given a core set of questions like any panel. No, I need to, no, speak into it closer. Is that better? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Might not be on. Maybe it was. We don't know. Okay, great. Don't count that towards my time, okay? First question we were given, right, is what is freedom? And at first, because I'm an artist, I'm from the Bay Area originally, I was like coming up with this visionary big picture idea, and I was like, okay, Jessica, but it's 2014 and you're in the United States, so let's actually talk about what it means for freedom in that context. So for me, for freedom in this context in 2014, in an election year and 158 days away from the next election, freedom is actually access to resources at the end of the day. Because we can't do anything without access to resources. And those resources in themselves, when we're talking about those resources, it's also affordability, right? So I'm a trainer, so I always talk about access and affordability. I usually talk in 2s or 3s, so you will hear me do that a lot. So those are the big 2 for me. So for me, that's talking about access to healthcare, access and affordability of higher education. It's talking about access to jobs training programs. It's access to financial literacy, okay? I wish somebody would have actually told me what to do with money when you get it, because I had no idea. And if somebody had told me that before I got that first credit card at 18, it might be a completely different story than what I'm dealing with right now, right? And so all of these things are kind of factored into our ability to even do anything, to actually be able to step out of a door, or to even have a door to step out of. So for me, that's the base of the understanding around this. We were asked, how does the work that I do, or how does the work of Black Youth Project 100 actually fit into this idea of freedom? So first, I'm unapologetically Black. I feel like I should be really clear about that. I am also a woman, I'm also queer, I'm also working class. I'm also the first person in my family to go to college. I'm not an academic. I went to college for 4 years, I did not get a degree. I went straight to work. I feel the need to say that only because I feel like sometimes in this space, there becomes a hierarchy of education, almost as if, like, because I don't have something, a comma after my name, I don't have something after that, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a PhD, I'm not even an undergraduate degree holder, that I don't have something to say and my experience is not valid, but I am an expert at the experience of being a young Black person in this United States, and that's enough. So that's what we are. Black Youth Project 100 is unapologetically Black. We operate from a lens of a political analysis that is queer, that is feminist. So no, we are not like every other national Black organization. I used to work for the NAACP as well. Literally until last month, okay? We, in terms of our work, look at all aspects. About policy work, we are looking at building proactive policy. Terrence, who is sitting here in the second row, that is some of the work that he's leading. We're talking about training and capacity building work, because yes, it's really exciting to talk about actions and hashtags, but if you're not actually building power, then how are you exercising power but not building it? So we talk about training and capacity building work. We talk about direct field actions. So we talk about building that work on a local level, not just the grass tops in DC where I live, but also doing that on a local level. And we talk about leadership development work, right? Because the work that we build is only as strong as the leaders we leave behind us, not just what's on my bio. So that's kind of our perspective on our work, and how we're building that is that we're doing that talking about the criminalization of Black lives right now. We had a Twitter town hall just a couple days ago. You can still participate with the hashtag criminalized lives. We're talking about how do we actually heal people in our community. It's okay, it happens to all of us. I don't even know what that song is. Okay. So that is the core of BYP's work. The last question that I will touch on is, there was a question around how can we engage in political movement building quilting. So for me, the first thing, and that is that we need to talk about how we actually build community and not coalition. I hate the word coalition. We need to actually talk about how we don't combine things, but we actually build things. So, for example, you know, I've seen T-shirts that say "Gay is the new black," or the immigration movement is the civil rights fight of the 21st century. No. The civil rights, these are all civil rights issues, right? So when we talk about LGBT issues, when we talk about immigration, and let's also be clear, none of this is new. I started working on the DREAM Act in 2003, okay? I ran a campaign with the United States Student Association. It was called Fighting for Immigrants' Rights to Education, and we fought for the DREAM Act and for the Permanent Partner Immigration Act for folks that were coming to this country to teach, to be professors, and the rights of their partners. So these aren't new battles, and this, you know, so this language of trying to just build everything together without actually thinking about what it means when you build these movements together is something we just can't do at this point in terms of how I think about it, is that we have to really build, but build intentionally. We have to build aware that there are different identities, that we have to actually build at the intersections of these identities instead of just combining all the identities and thinking that that's gonna work, because it doesn't. So we have to have, you know, the last question we were asked was, is it one movement or many movements? It's both. It is that we need to recognize that there are many separate movements, but that if I'm not a part of that movement, I can still support you. I don't have to be leading in every single space. We lead in Black youth because that's what our identity is and that's what we do, but that doesn't mean that we don't support on every other issue that's progressive and that's out there, because that's how we win. It's the only way to win. And just to be really clear, you know, I said 158 days away from the election. For me, we have movement, because let's be clear that only about 25% of young people age 18 to 24 actually attend institutions of higher education, and only about 57% of them are in any institution of higher education ever, at all, ever, right? So let's be clear, that's still, so we're talking about young people that don't attend higher education. When we look at things like healthcare and we look at HIV, you know, in 2011, according to the CDC, we had 23,000 new cases of HIV in the Black community. The next community is white people at less than 11,000. You know, when we talk about debt, student loan debt has surpassed credit card debt at this point in this country. The average loan debt that students are graduating with is over $25,000. 81% of Black students will graduate with debt. When we look at unemployment, yeah, it's really exciting when people say it's 6.6 is the percentage of unemployment in this country, but when it comes to Black people, it's 12.1%. When it comes to young Black kids from between the ages of 16 and 19, it's over 36%. So right now, we don't have a choice about if we're only talking about many movements. We have to build one movement because it's our lives, and we're literally fighting for our lives right now. If you like living, then you need to build a movement together with the people in this room and the people that can't be in this room, because there's a lot of people who cannot be in these rooms because they have to work, because they have to go to school, because they cannot do this as work. So we have to think about that in terms of when we're actually talking about one or many movements. It's both, but we have to build now.
Okay, so Jessica Pierce is my friend, and I'm really questioning why I sat next to her today. My name is Sierra Taylor. I'm the political director for the Dream Defenders, and I'm very happy to be here. The Dream Defenders is an organization that began 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, after the death of Trayvon Martin. At that point, I was a senior at Florida A&M University, and it had been 40 days since Trayvon Martin was murdered by George Zimmerman, and George Zimmerman still hadn't been arrested. And we didn't know what to do. I was a student, like I said. I didn't know if I had any power or, you know, what I should do. I just knew I was really pissed off and something needed to be done. Luckily, I was given a conference call number, and I still don't know who gave me this conference call number. I think it's just the way the universe works sometimes. But I got on this conference call, and I guess now that I know the story of the conference call, I guess it was only supposed to be about 30 or 40 people on the call, but it turned out to be about 150 people on the call. So on this conference call, when it was 150 people discussing what we should do about this situation, there was one suggestion thrown out by Gabriel Pendis, who was a founder of Dream Defenders, and he recently returned from, I believe, the 48th anniversary of the March from Selma to Montgomery. And so what he proposed was that we honor this march from Selma to Montgomery, and we march 40 miles, starting in Daytona Beach, Florida, at Bethune-Cookman University, and march to Sanford, Florida, where Trayvon Martin was killed. I thought this idea was crazy. And I was just like, 40 miles of marching, it was going to take us 3 days, and what would this do? But something told me to go on the march and just do it anyway. And then when I got on the bus leaving from Tallahassee to Daytona Beach, Florida, I was once again sort of disappointed, because not only was I about to embark on this 3-day, 40-mile march, there were only about 3 people on the bus with me. And so when we got to Daytona Beach, Florida, and I thought there was going to be all these 150 people on this call, and there were only 40 of us, I really thought we were screwed. So we ended up doing the march anyway. We marched from Daytona Beach, Florida, as I said, to Sanford, Florida. And when we got there, we were once again put at the position of what do we do? We've done this march. We gained this media attention. We had people join us. We've brought the attention, to a national level. Obviously not by ourselves, but with several different organizations and people going down to Sanford, Florida. But the question was, what do we do about George Zimmerman? Because, you had the Al Sharptons march down there, you had the Jesse Jacksons, all these people of power, going to Sanford, Florida and demanding action, and nothing happened. And so the next day, in being in Sanford, Florida, we decided that we were going to block the police station doors in Sanford, Florida. And of course, I thought this was crazy too. Because as I said, I was a senior at Florida A&M University. I was about to graduate. I didn't have time to be arrested, but something had to be done. And, as it's often said, radical times call for radical measures. And so about 6 of us, including myself, went to the police station doors, and we knelt in front of the police station doors and we prayed for justice. Not knowing what was going to happen, thinking that we were going to be arrested. And instead of arresting us, the police station shut down for the day. They redirected their traffic to a local hospital, and we were able to sit down with local elected officials and the chief of police to discuss the demands that we had for this action. And we had 3 demands. Obviously, the first demand was for George Zimmerman to be arrested. The second demand was for the chief of police, Bill Lee, who had botched this case, obviously, because George Zimmerman hadn't been arrested. We wanted him to be fired. And we wanted a review of the Stand Your Ground law and how it disproportionately affects people of color. And after about 3 to 4 hours of negotiations, we were told that we would get all the demands that we wanted. It's okay, you can clap. I was really excited too. And then we went outside and we had this, huge press conference. I'm like 22 years old. I was able to give the press conference. This is my first time doing this. I was so excited, and I was standing out there with the Dream Defenders, newly formed, and the people of Sanford, and I was telling them this amazing thing. We got these 3 demands met. Isn't this wonderful? The people of Sanford didn't think so. They were pissed. And I remember feeling so confused, because I was like, we came here, we did this march, we sat in front of the police station doors, we got these 3 demands. Why the fuck are you angry? And after talking with the people of Sanford, we found out that although we did, gain these accomplishments, we took power away from the people in Sanford. Because we were from outside of Sanford. We were not of the community. We went in there and we thought we were going to be superheroes and save the day. And so people in this community who had been wanting to meet with their local elected officials before Trayvon Martin was killed, because there were obvious problems that were going on before, and not being able to do so, all of a sudden you have these college students who are able to meet with their local officials and make their demands that they wanted, and win on the battles that they felt that they should win on. So I guess that leads into the question of what is freedom? And for me, freedom is the ability for people to self-determine the destinies of their own communities. And this is what Dream Defenders has built our organization around. It's not about the individual fight. It's not about stand your ground. It's not about the school to prison pipeline. It's not about mass incarceration or mass criminalization, as was spoken about last night. It's about the issue of people not being able to govern themselves and have power in their own communities. And so since then, we have trained, organized, and developed leaders, and continuing to train, organize, and develop leaders, including myself, in the art of organizing, how to build power in your communities, how to do outreach, how to do research, and knowing who to speak to in order to get the things that you're demanding. And so, once again, I just thank you all for allowing me to be here and speaking with you all today.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ashley Baker, but some of you might know me as Baker. But I just want to thank everybody here. I'm really inspired and motivated to be with y'all, and I can't wait to go back and do more work at UCSB. So, closer. So, in 1968, black students at UCSB campus, they protested at North Hall, and North Hall during that time was like a big place for everybody to go, for faculty, students, administrations. So they decided to protest there because they felt that black students' demands weren't being met, and at that time, the percentage of black students was less than 1%, 0.4%, and so they asked for the Malcolm X Hall, but that didn't happen, unfortunately. But they did, we did receive Black Studies, the Department of Black Studies, and yeah, and the Center for Black Research. I'm a little nervous, so bear with me. So then we found out about this in 2012, and we're like, hey, why don't we just like get this forward? Like, it's 50 years later, why not change the name to Malcolm X Hall? That wasn't the case, apparently. So we presented a series of demands to increase the funding of black student recruitment, fund black mental health services. So with the black mental health services, we hired 2 psychologists who have extensive experience with working with black folks, because it's a completely different experience when you go in and you're talking to somebody who doesn't look like you at all. They don't understand what you're going through. They don't understand the struggle. And it's better to receive advice from somebody who's been in your shoes. So instead of renaming the hall to Malcolm X Hall, we had a negotiation with the administration to receive $2 million for endowed chairs. So endowed chairs are, one moment, so they've raised $250,000 so far, and this would further diversity of curriculum and allow black students to see themselves reflected within faculty and research. Can't even read my writing. Spears at UCSB, and what's another? Okay. And then instead of renaming the hall to North Hall to Malcolm X Hall, we'd be naming it to, we would have a student activism display that would commemorate the work of the 68ers. And of course, we also want to enhance BSU, the team that presented these demands. We wanted to increase outreach by having a list of all incoming students, first years, and transfer students, so that we could help them better adjust to the campus. So to make sure all of these demands were achieved. So to make sure that these went through, yeah. Okay. To make sure that these demands were followed through, we wanted to create an external review panel. So we would bring outside professors or scholars to come in and check the climate at UCSB, because it's less than 3% black people like at this campus. It's so difficult. If you're not living on the black scholars floor, like you're only like, at least from my experience, I was the only like black person on my hall, and it was really hard to like find community or people to relate to me. I was always seen as like the token black girl, and that's just like, that's not who I am. I'm more than that, you know? And so I'm really happy this is all happening, but you know, things move slowly. You have to wait. There's a process with everything. But we're also doing more work on campus in regards to prisons and mass imprisonment. So in Santa Maria, they're trying to build another ICE detention center and jail, because apparently it's overcrowded. But it's overcrowding because they have gang injunctions. So gang injunctions is so they have like this list of like gang members supposedly, and they can't go into certain parts of Santa Barbara, which is basically like all of Santa Barbara, and like Latino communities. There's a high community of Latinos that live in this city, and so if you're related to any of these people on the list, you can't be there. And so basically they just want to kick everybody out. It's painful. And so like this would cost $130 million to build and $17 million a year to maintain. Yeah, I'm just like in awe right now. And so the coalition that's started, it's called Coalition for Sustainable Communities, and so it's basically like a grassroots organization, and we're also working with students and community members, because I found that when people know about the prison expansion, they actually care about it and they want to do something about it. So right now we're just in the process of educating everybody. And I just want to say that like these institutions are like made for us just to survive, you know. And I don't want to just survive. I want to thrive. I want to do things. I don't just want to be a statistic. So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Nice. I'm scattered brain right now. Forgive me. Like I'm still trying to digest like all this awesomeness, like all these great things on these panels. So first, I just want to echo what everyone said. It's truly an honor to be here. It is truly an honor to sit on this panel. Thank you, Barbara Ransby, and like the organizers for this great, great conference. So while here, like we're talking about what is freedom, what is the meaning of freedom, how do we attain freedom, whether that be through social media, through art, through activism, through our organizing. And although I don't have a definite ideology of what meaning of freedom is, I know that freedom is dimensional. There's not a monolithic way of attaining freedom or being free. However, like freedom is not prison. Freedom is not the fact that there has been 22 prisons built in California in the last 30 years in comparison to the one UC, the University of California. Like there has been a narrowing of our freedom imaginations because we have impoverished language to speak our social experiences. And I feel like something that Jessica brought up earlier is like the language that we have, these power dynamics that we face. Baker was talking about earlier the UCSB demands, and I've been involved with the demand since its beginning in 2013, and something that is really unique about our collective is that it's mostly composed of women of color, of black women actually, and when we were going through the process, we felt like that power dynamics, because in negotiating with the chancellor, they're all like men at the table. So it's like these black women sitting next to these majority like white men, asking them for more resources sorry, I need water, y'all. Yeah, it's like men sitting in these meetings with the chancellors and other administrators asking for more resources to recruit and retain Black students on our campuses. And just like dealing with that power dynamic, dealing with like the language barrier of like them speaking all of this like eloquent language and like us not understanding, you know, what an FTE is or like, you know, what an endowed chair is, and like having to go and do like more research to educate ourselves on the language that they speak. And then additionally, when, you know, we received, when we have like all of our demands like successfully implemented, a lot of the praise was given to like the 1 or 2 Black men that was in the collective. And so the Black man that was in the collective wrote a memoir commemorating the Black women in the group for like all of our accomplishments and like all of our success, because like when we're talking about organizing, when we're talking about like activism, we have to think about like who's been left out and like who's not being talked about. And for us, like that was most of the Black women in our group. And something else that like I just want to talk about that's kind of been that I'm echoing from this this panel is that I mean, it doesn't start in higher education. It honestly starts like K through 12. It honestly starts like in the field, the community workers, the people that can't even be in this room right now. And so another collective community that I work with is Ignite, increasing graduation, not incarceration, transforming education. And what that is a California statewide project that we're working on to like lobby our legislators to pass bills like Ban the Box that that like has a disparity for like, you know, students of color, that criminalizes them and like makes it harder for them to like be into like these institutions of higher learning. And so, like with Ignite, with the community Coalition of Sustainable Communities, and just like with a host of other things, like what it means to like have freedom or to like do like what is it, quilting? Is to be like all inclusive of like the different spaces. Like we have to think about for us like what it means to like be in solidarity with what's happening in Palestine right now. Actually, last spring, government at UCSB passed a resolution to divest from companies that profit from the prison industrial complex. So that was like a huge thing for us, but we're trying to get more UC schools to do it as well. This 2-3 weeks ago, actually, like we had a 10-hour Senate meeting because we were trying to divest from the companies that benefit from the apartheid in Palestine right now, and they tried to again like indefinitely tabled the bill as well. So we had like a discussion about the silencing of our voices, the fact that our public institutions are now becoming privatized, and just like the fact that as students, like and people of color and like Black folks, like we're not able to articulate our experiences because we have an impoverished language to do so.
So I just want to remind everybody that when I opened this panel, the plenary, you know, I said this was the best panel in the conference. I wasn't lying, right? So can we give it up for them one more time? So we're going to go right into questions because we want to make sure we have an opportunity to hear from the audience, but there are other workshops that we can consider equally as good or probably almost as good that are going to be coming up later on in the day, so we want to not run into their time. So what I'm going to make sure we do is if we can take, let's say at least 4 questions from the audience, and then we'll give the panel an opportunity to respond, and then we'll go back for another round of questions as well. So first the gentleman in the back, and then folks who have questions, if you can keep your hands up, and we'll have the person with the mic come around to you.
Okay, good morning. I had 2 questions. The first is for my brother Jaleel, and I want to say that I was very much what I would call now a narrow Black nationalist, and so I just want to this activist work at Dartmouth, because I think that in particular they've been able to struggle with themselves around questions of heterosexism and questions of patriarchy, and understand the ways in which these pathologies are inextricable from white supremacy. So much more advanced than I was at their own age.
And the question?
So the real, yes.
Yeah, the real question, yes.
So the real question to Jaleel real quick is on this question of blackness and black identity and black solidarity at a place like Dartmouth, which is a very aggressively white nationalist place, and a place in which, like so many other institutions, the sort of ideology of post-racialism is so deeply embedded and really enables anti-black racism on one hand, and on the other hand, there are real opportunities for black students to opt out, right, of blackness. So how do you sort of create and cultivate a sort of positive, activist sense of black identity and black solidarity on one hand, and on the other hand, resist the kind of orthodoxies, black essentialism that actually ends up undermining your activist project? So that was real quick. And then a real quick follow-up question.
Brother, real quick, let's just leave it there.
So, since we have to get through all the questions, and I know the panelists are brilliant, but they have to remember 4 questions. Can you start with your question?
Yeah.
Go ahead and go over there too. Oh, wait, no.
Yes.
Is this on?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay, so if you're gonna answer my question, or you want to just give
I want the next question, please.
Okay, cool. My name is Jazz Hudson. I'm from Oakland, California. I work with the Black Youth Project 100. Well, I'm part of the Black Youth Project 100, and then I also work with the African American Male Achievement Initiative in Oakland, California. My question is not as layered, it's very simple. I heard each and every one of you guys talk about your investment to your people, your investment as young activists, but I want to know personally, what type of advice would you give to young people who are interested in being a part of this movement, especially touching upon like young people who don't have degrees? What type of advice would you give them about navigating and more importantly, self-care? What is your self-care tool that you use in this movement?
Great question. Next questions, not necessarily prelude statements, but questions. Yes.
My name is Ronnie. I'm a student at Michigan. My question for all of you is, how were you able to deal with the group dynamics as you were organizing? Because I do know that you have a lot of different identities, and some of you touched on it very briefly. I know you don't have a lot of time, but how did you deal with the, particularly having, like, how did you deal with group dynamics and conflicting identities, and how did you deal with allies? Is my next question. What type of advice would you give to people who are also looking to do this type of work? What type of pitfalls should they look out for, and things of that nature?
Hi. My question is, first of all, my comment is I want to thank you. I want to thank all the other young people that I've known over the past few years that has changed my way of thinking and my way of looking at the world, and have just opened up whole new possibilities to me that I didn't realize existed. And it's working, it's working. My question to you is kind of what's happening now in our schools, in our elementary schools, and especially here in Chicago, that our kids, you hear college and career, and I'm listening to you guys, and our kids are being tested and tested and tested, and there's right answers. It's almost like trying to get these kids for that, when they get to college, do what you're doing. My question is, how did you get to where you are, that you're doing what you're doing, and how do we get to our young kids, our 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, to get them not to, to opt out and not follow what's going on with the liberal reform education reform.
Cool. Thank you. Panel. Say what?
The questions.
We're doing one question at a time, or are we going to down?
Just try to hit them all.
Yeah, just try to hit them all. We got
Hit 'em all.
not a lot of time, so.
Okay, I'll try to be quick.
Brilliant.
Yes, I'll try. To Professor Rickford's unique question, I think the question around blackness And even organizing in the Black community was a real challenge at Dartmouth, and I'm sure a challenge at many of our colleges, because you have students who identify with their Blackness in a lot of different ways. And for some students, even releasing a document like the Freedom Budget made them really angry, because I have responses from students that we were making it hard for them. We were intensifying what they already experience every day, which we acknowledge that was a part of the product of releasing the Freedom Budget. But I think important organizing tool or important conversation that we had while creating the Freedom Budget Collective was that we weren't so much concerned with Blackness as identity, and we didn't get so much caught up in Blackness through identity politics, but we tried to understand Blackness more as like an ideology and try to understand it more as not something that we come together because we all just share this burden, but something that we come together because we all share this legacy of people who have fought for freedom, for people who have created strategies of how to survive and thrive when the whole world is telling you that you aren't meant to be, when the whole world is telling you that you're disposable. How do you use those strategies to still be? So I think that type of Blackness allowed us to still form a strong collective, but I acknowledge there was a lot of divides. That for some students, they wanted to keep their head low, and we didn't really make that possible this year. So Blackness is dynamic, but I think that it also has to always acknowledge where it comes from, and that's really complicated. And can't break it all down in this panel, but that's kind of how we approached it. And then just really quick advice to young people who want to get involved with this. I think that a lot of times the academic jargon and language creates like barriers around what we can do. And I constantly try to like tell people that when we say like white hegemony or something like that, that's the same thing that people are saying back home when they say fuck the police. And like really try to make those connections we spend a lot of time theorizing and saying that we are in solidarity with people, but a lot of times we don't use the words and experiences that they're using, that they're going through. So I think the first thing is realizing that how they're already describing their experiences is valid and okay, and then just disrupt. Do what you can to rebel against things that don't fit into you. Use those spaces and moments where you feel like a contradiction to create something new, to imagine whatever you wish was or wherever you want to be. Try to just disrupt, to rebel, to create that. And that can be so many different things and look a lot of different ways. But sometimes when you don't know what to do, you just gotta fuck some shit up and then see what comes from it. So.
So I'm going to try and hit on some of these real quick. In terms of group dynamics, the question of group dynamics, I think that it's really useful not to think about allyship in terms of like a noun, but more as a verb. You're always in a process of learning how to be useful to the people that you want to build with intentionally. And I sort of like to think about accountability to other people who you are in community with as like, sometimes it's like quicksand. If somebody expresses, or you can tell that you've hurt them in some way, that you haven't thought about something, that you, whether intentionally or not, have dismissed their lived experience, you need to learn how to be still in that. Instead of sort of, your initial reaction, oh, I didn't mean to, or that's not where I was coming from, or they're just being oversensitive, be still in it for a little bit. Feel the fact that you've hurt somebody, and let that feeling transform you. Let it change your actions and the way that you approach allyship and building. The next thing is in terms of like some of like the common pitfalls, I think like they're really closely related. The idea that if you hold an identity that has been traditionally marginalized, you can't hurt somebody else is just not true. And that's something that you really need to keep in mind if you want to build in a useful, intentional way. I think that sort of lends itself to the idea of self-care, because if you are committed to being intentional and accountable to how the people who you've chosen as community feel, then you're naturally sort of going to drift towards a place where you're invested in the well-being of one another. But I think, and it's an important thing to sort of understand that you can't do everything immediately, that these things take time. And I think that in terms of the post-racial rhetoric that has so kind of insidiously seeped into the rhetoric of just every day in a way that's become really normalized, it's important to trust yourself. Trust your feeling. I think especially like in institutions of higher learning, it's all about privileging the rational and the objective, and if you're feeling things, then it can't be true, or it must be further away from the truth, and that's absolutely false. If you're feeling something, it's because you're human. And it's the feeling of that humanness that's gonna lend to your ability to helping other human beings thrive and not just cope with what they're dealing with. In terms of the question about elementary schools, I think that part of the reason that so many people in college, like that's the period of time where they really sort of awaken to this new sort of consciousness, is because it's the first time that they're learning about things that actually relate to their lived experience, things that they've never been able to articulate before, things that they didn't know were even a thing, that could even be classified as knowledge. And I think that in terms of what that does to your psyche, the earlier that can happen, the better. So I think in elementary schools, if you're teaching kids about things that they can actually relate to, experiences that they're not necessarily supposed to talk about in everyday settings like race or class or gender, but that relate to their actual lived experience, then that can really have an effect in terms of what they're willing to talk about, what they're willing to acknowledge as their own experience and their own truth, and to be able to speak to that.
So we're very short on time, and I don't want to run into the next plenary. If you, for the rest of the panelists, if you have response, if you could just respond to one question and keep it as brief as possible, please. Just like 1 minute or what have you.
Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the group dynamics. So part of our Divest movement was that we had calls for accountability, that we had 7 sort of like demands that we wanted the university to meet. And so one of the nights, like the second or third night, we had a very long, like 4-hour, like a 3-hour meeting with administration. The vice president was talking to the entire group of students, and they agreed to like one of the biggest demands, which was for the university to release a statement. So it was a night for us all to celebrate. Everyone was really happy, was really excited. The building closed at 2 a.m. And then it reached, and then we were aware that one of the students felt really uncomfortable because there was a situation where someone had said something to her that was very racist, was very anti-black. So she left. She felt that the space was not for her anymore. And so that night, we decided that we were going to address that. And we went in there and we said, listen, this movement is not gonna go any further unless we address these things, because. We received some backlash, like as me as a Palestinian, as a woman of color. People were telling me that, oh well, this is a matter of urgency. Like, shouldn't we talk about this later? Couldn't you have like pulled one person aside? And so I think that was the way we sort of dealt with it, is that an understanding that we can't, just because we're fighting against one system of oppression, it's always easy to fight, like as was said earlier, that white supremacy is like a common enemy, but then we don't look into our own communities and how anti-blackness exists into our own communities, and that's the is difficult part. So that's sort of how we tried to deal with it. And so, yeah, that's what I was going to say. And also, I think understanding that the term ally, when I'm talking about other movements, not specifically Divest, for me, ally or the term woman of color is something that's earned, and it's not something that you sort of give yourself. So always keeping that in mind for me is important.
So I'm going to answer the question of self-care. I've been wrestling with this idea for the longest time, because I think this week I celebrate 5 years of being in recovering from an eating disorder, and so self-care for me is a matter of life or death at that point. So I have to practice some type of self-care, and in this moment, at this year, it got to the point that I cared more, at certain points, I wanted to do my thesis, and mind you, I hate that thing. I wanted to do my thesis more than I wanted to do this because people were asking me, can you do this? And I've learned how to be a people pleaser and just say yes to everything. And so by the time January came around, I was burnt out, and I was happy that I ended up getting food poisoning because I got to sleep in my room and shut off the world. I didn't want to be a part of anyone or anything anymore. And so I think the biggest thing about self-care is validating feelings. And I think what Imani said about this whole idea of celebrating the rational when your feelings don't matter. Well, your feelings do matter at this point, because your feelings, your self-care is the only thing that's going to sustain you. And if you cannot sustain yourself, you're not going to be able to sustain the rest of your community. And so really making sure that you're sustaining the collective and thinking about the collective and being accountable to each other and letting people know that it's okay to say no, and it's okay to say I'm hurt, and it's okay to say I'm angry, and it's okay to say I don't know what to do, and I'm very confused, and I'm terrified. So validating the feelings in those moments and really finding the thing that's going to sustain you and make you thrive. So, yeah.
All right, so I have to apologize. I got to be a little bit of a people pleaser myself, and I know the rest of the panel has responses to some of the questions, but
I gotta say something, man.
we really have to make way for the following plenary.
Even if I'm walking off the stage, I gotta say
Okay. 30 seconds.
I'm gonna try.
Okay.
I'll try to be really quick. I just have to. Just a couple basic principles for me. So first, with like young people in elementary schools at this point, right? Like 60 to 70% of textbooks come out of the state of Texas, and they want to take the president out of textbooks, right? So the first thing I think is to work with young people outside of schools, right? Like, because we have to educate them in alternative ways. Like, even if we just look at how they tell the story of Rosa Parks, that's not how it happened, right? And then just my last couple basic things. I think we need to legitimize more different types of leadership. I think we have an older generation that's invested in developing leaders that look and act like them instead of developing different types of leadership. So please, like, be invested in us as leaders, developing in different ways, because we're not like each other. Because in BYP 100, we're all very different. We disagree all the time, but we just respect the fact that we are different types of leaders, and that we're invested in the same vision, and that we have to have people working inside of the system and outside of the system for us to create change. And then for folks that don't identify in our communities, I don't want your sympathy, I don't want your empathy, I don't want your compassion, I don't want you to empower me, I don't want you to come and teach and train Black people. I want you to talk to other white folks, I want you to talk to other LGBT folks, I want you to talk to other Latino, Chicano folks about what it is that it is our responsibility towards making this movement actually happen.
Okay.
Can I just say one thing? I'm sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so I just wanted to say this last thing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We're rebels. I mean, come on. So I think the most important thing that I've learned within organizing, and I think this plays into self-care, is that you will never be able to know everything about everything. And so sometimes, it's okay to stay with your issue. I mean, you can always support other movements, but you're not going to know everything about Asiatic bears and, all this random other, very important issues. Stay within your craft, stay within your focus, and, make yourself the best organizer for the issue that is most imperative to your cause that you can be. So that's it.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I'm gonna just echo what everyone else said, but this is just a shameless plug. If you are a recent PhD, or you're gonna have your PhD by next year, we are looking for postdocs for our Center for Black Studies Research. So please contact me afterwards. And if you are a professor looking to possibly teach in like the UC system, then we'll have our Ella Vicker visiting professorship. We are currently in our applicant pool right now. So if you're interested in coming, you can have any discipline. We're just asking for people who have studied the Black world. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I want to thank you all for your attention, and a big thank you to this delightfully rebellious panel. So I want to remind you that if you're a tweeter, you can join the online conversation using the hashtag FDFN2014. for the time-conscious folks, we are clearly over time. We had in the schedule a 10-minute break. Many of you are already in the room for the next plenary, so we're going to shorten that to 5 minutes, and we're going to be real sticklers about that. So we're going to have a 5-minute break, and I'm going to ask the moderator and the panelists for the next plenary to come up on stage, and then we'll get started. Thank you so much.
We coming! We ready! We coming!